The world spent 2020 on defense, trying to play catch-up against a fast-moving pathogen with simple tactics like masks or social distancing. But in the medical field, innovation became the name of the game. Scientists develop vaccines at breakneck speed, putting governments on offense. They're inoculating whole populations to outsmart this prickly little competitor, and looking at other ways to innovate our way out of the crisis.
A survey by the consultancy McKinsey shows 90% of executives from all fields expect COVID to change the way they do business. But it's an opportunity few feel equipped to pursue. The study also shows commitment to innovate fell last year, except in the pharma and medical sectors.
Is this simple light bulb a weapon against the coronavirus? Rosario Valles thinks so. Together with other researchers, the doctor invented this LED lamp. Its light has certain frequency characteristics which could destroy the coronavirus. This light bulb is similar to an ordinary one. You screw it in, switch it on, and it works. The light then destroys all microorganisms by destroying their structure, that is, the outer membrane, and in the case of the coronavirus, probably also the protein spike, the sting. This has already worked with bacteria, and a series of experiments carried out by the researchers together with the Italian military have now also shown that the special LED light destroys the coronavirus. And it's not harmful to humans either. Now we have to fine-tune the whole experiment in some way, because we must not forget that up to now we have done the whole thing in laboratory conditions, which are different from the normal environment. The coronavirus pandemic in Italy has also inspired other inventions. For instance, when ventilators became scarce in hospitals and doctors sounded the alarm, these young researchers quickly developed a valve model in their startup company. The valve can be produced with a 3D printer and attached to a standard commercial sports snorkeling mask. The next day, we took this to the hospital. They tested the ventilator for half an hour. Then a doctor came and said, "They work. We need 100 of them within the next 24 hours." Another new invention is this anti-COVID carpet. It reduces the amount of bacteria and viruses carried into rooms from outside. Step on it once, and your shoes are disinfected. The carpet automatically releases disinfectant when it senses weight. The inventors of the anti-coronavirus lamp hope they too can soon implement their disinfectant in hospitals and schools.
And let's talk to economist Getten de Rassenfoss from the Swiss Science and Technology Institute, EPFL. A lot of the know-how behind these sorts of inventions was around before the pandemic. Why weren't they already in existence? I mean, they would have made our lives so much better and could have stopped more than just the coronavirus, also the common flu and many other things.
That's true. That's a very good point. We used to say that necessity is the mother of invention. So now we actually see the needs for these new technologies. And besides, there is now a huge market of potential buyers willing to buy these products, which did not exist before, or certainly not to the same extent. So we actually do see a burst of innovation because of the needs and the market, therefore.
And then we seem to be outdoing ourselves on other levels when it comes to vaccines, say, developed in record time, and not only just one, we've got more than one.
True, and we might be worried that we are wasting money. So on the one hand, we are putting lots of resource on developing vaccine research. There has been more than 200 vaccines under development, but only a handful of winners. And so as much as, we praise the winners and we might even complain that they may be making money, we should not forget that a lot of actually losers, a very long tail of firms who have invested money and just wasted money, essentially.
So are you saying a lot of wasted competition? In other words, we could be working on other fronts, not just vaccines, but also treatments and cures?
Yeah, and more than that. So, of course, we're putting a lot of money and brains into COVID-related issues. But we should not forget that the earth have other problems that we need to tackle. And so we've been diverting a lot of research away from all of these other questions. So as much as COVID research is accelerating, we might be worried that there is a slowdown of research in these other fields of science.
Back to innovation, what about the sharing of the knowledge of something like a vaccine? Some of these companies are holding on tight to their patents, aren't they?
True. Lots of knowledge has been shared. Scientists do talk to each other, and we know a lot, and we collect information from various different countries and institutions. Nevertheless, the fact that firms want to keep their IP rights firmly is just business as usual. I know that some people, some countries complain about the strong enforcement of IP for vaccine research typically, but we should not forget that private firms, have a duty to produce vaccine doses fast enough. If they fail, government can actually seize the patents, or at least ask for compulsory licensing and start producing the vaccine themselves.
So, based on that, what would you say the role is that money does play in innovation? And in this case, is it profits that's driving innovation?
The expectation of profit is certainly driving innovation, but nevertheless, many people in the pharmaceutical industry are not just motivated by money. These are people working on curing people. They really care about getting out of the crisis, and that's back to our necessity is the mother of invention. That is playing a very big role as well, of course.
Isn't it also in times of crisis and when there's a lack of funds that we become more innovative?
That's very much true, and we have seen surprisingly low-cost innovation, say at the early days of the pandemic on respiratory devices, and we've seen very, very creative solutions indeed.
Also, history suggests companies that invest in innovation through a crisis outperform peers in the recovery. Is that what we're going to see in this case, do you think?
Most likely, and indeed, a crisis is a good time to actually invest in innovation, but very few firms, unfortunately, can afford to do so. We should not forget that research has been, research and innovation, not only in COVID, but in general, has been slowed down. People have to stay at home. They might not have easy access to the lab. So it's extremely challenging to maintain a high level of innovation during this pandemic in particular.
And the big question, will we innovate enough to prevent the next pandemic?
We'll not be able to prevent the next pandemic, but we can certainly mitigate its effects. And the only way we can do so is by keeping investing in a strong science society. We need a strong science ecosystem. We need to fund universities, but not only. We also need to have, say, an appropriate immigration policy. So think of the developers of the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine. One of the guys is actually a Turkish migrant, right? And so we need to work on a strong science ecosystem, and that goes as far as immigration policies and education policies. And it's only with a highly performing knowledge society that we will be able to mitigate the effect of the next pandemic.
Gerhard Rassenfors from the EPFL, thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thank you.
And here's our science correspondent, Derek Williams, with your questions on the coronavirus.
What lessons are we learning from COVID-19 that might help us deal with the next pandemic?
This excellent question has way more answers than I can go into here, but some lessons are obviously more important than others. At the top of the list, I'd say, is what we've learned about rapid response. SARS-CoV-2 completely outran our ability to get on top of it early because it could spread faster than we could react. I don't want to go into why or who supposedly did what wrong early on because I think it makes no sense to play the blame game. But it does make sense to look at how we can speed up international response to spillover events like the one that started this pandemic. Because if you can be certain of one thing, it's that they're going to happen again in the future. And that means, in my opinion, giving the WHO or a successor organization the money and real backing it will need to recognize threats, declare emergencies, and react faster and more independently of the nations that make it up. A second important lesson that people have learned from this pandemic, I hope, is that human health doesn't exist in a vacuum, that it's closely tied to the health of the environment. We actually all know that already. Things like air and water pollution kill millions of us every year, and the repeated emergence of new diseases is directly tied to the fact that we now really can and do go to pretty much every corner of the planet while destroying the habitats that act as buffer zones between us and pathogens that can jump the species barrier. When that happens, science can help, but it can't provide instant fixes. And where science can really help most, I think, is not in the accelerated development of vaccines, although, believe me, that's been really amazing to follow, but instead through its potential to help us reach the longer-term goals of greener, more sustainable societies, ones that recognize how dependent our own health is on the environment around us.